And joining us here, would you please welcome the General Manager of Women's Football for Football Federation Australia, Sarah Walsh. Principal and Editor of The Women's Game, Anne Odong. I just call it The Women's Game, it's The Women's Game, I know that. And on the end there, Teo Pellizzeri, who has so many roles, but we'll go with Fox Sports Commentator and Media and Comms Manager at FFV. Welcome to you, Teo. So we might make it nice and neat and go down the line. Walshy, for the last... How many years have you been commentating now?
5 or 6? Or
5 or 6?
That wasn't on the script.
That wasn't on the script, no. I didn't show you the script. That's how it works in media, you ad-lib. Yeah. I've had the pleasure of working with you for a couple of years. Just to give us some insight as an elite player, how different is it to actually have to talk about the other players on the pitch, and how much harder is it?
That's a really good question. It's quite difficult to find the balance, especially personally. Obviously the GM of women's football, I have a lot of access to knowledge, so trying to, work the fine line of how much information to share, and even about the players. You know the players intimately. I've been with them in with them all camp, but I try to provide, I guess, that extra insight as to what's going on with the player, what they're thinking about on game day, and really what they're going through throughout the week. So I guess probably more of those intimate insights into what's Sam Kerr thinking about now that she's got pressure on her shoulders to have to score more goals, and how she approaches her matches and how she approaches training, and how that impacts team dynamics. Something we probably don't think about, seeing Sam flip everywhere. What's that like for her teammates? With the focus on her. But look, they're doing amazingly, and can't wait to watch the game tonight.
I wonder what it's like for the medical staff when they see Sam Kerr do backflips. I'm sure they all get twitches as well. And for any of you who haven't had the opportunity to be behind the scenes in a comms box, I don't know if you do this to Teo, but when I commentate with Sarah, she has this horrible habit of if you know something's going on at FFA, or there's been a fight between some of the girls, and you throw it out there and she just looks at you and goes... and there's just dead air. So
she stops doing that.
You learn very quickly just not to ask her any controversial questions. Walshy, around W League broadcasting and what's out there, how much do you think that helps increase participation?
Oh, it's massive, and I think everybody in the room understands the great opportunity through traditional media. I know these two will talk about digital media, which is a new age, and obviously, but I still think there's a huge need for traditional media in terms of TV, whether it's subscription through Fox Sports or free-to-air. And if you look at some of the bigger codes, they're prominent in the free-to-air markets. You've got AFL, they're on Channel 7. We now have SBS with the game tonight. It is so crucial that everybody can access that, especially that free-to-air element. A lot of people watch the Fox Sports, but you look at the WNBL when they went off ABC. I know it was a strategic imperative for FFA at the time to make sure that didn't happen with the W League. So a lot of people won't know that we actually funded the W League to be on air with ABC, well, the production costs for that. So really, really important, not only for, I guess you talk about exposure and reach, but the social impact that has on young females. And I can talk to experience. I never had that growing up. I wanted to play for Manchester United until the age of 12, the men's team. And the Socceroos to the age of 9. Didn't get to do either of those. But yeah, it's massively important, that reach.
It certainly is, and we'll talk to Anne and Teo, as you said, in the digital space in just a moment. One question I do have for you, and it might be of interest to some of you here. When you're calling a game, I know that I often have the knee-jerk reaction that if the game is really crap, you still want to talk it up because you want people to believe in the product, and you want people who are watching to think, oh, yeah, this is good.
No game is ever crap.
I was just about to say the same thing.
No game is ever crap.
There's some quite turgid games. There really have been. But we've actually grown up past that, haven't we? Women's football is mature enough now, and we can call a spade, correct?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. I always find something that I like in a game, though. I think, no, I know.
Okay, fine.
It's a boring answer, but those games that you're talking about where we looked at each other after the match going, oh, that was hard. I've always found something that I liked in it. It was either, you know, one of the bottom teams on the table trying to scrap to get a point to stay in the finals race, and there's always a story to be told. So, yeah. But look, back to female participation. When it's question time, I'd love to know how much of an impact it's actually, how much having the W League on Fox Sports and SBS this year and ABC for the last 5-6 years, probably longer than that. How much of an impact that's made on the participants within your club, actually being able to see and have that visible on TV. Another thing to that is how important do you think it is to actually have females working within the media, commentating on the game and actually being on the panel to talk about it and actually analyse the match rather than just seeing suits up there all the time. So be keen to hear about that.
And in fact, it was last season at Fox Sports for the first time we had completely female commentary and hosting team, and it was it was quite an experience. Before I move on to Anne, I do want to warn all of you at the grassroots level, at the club level, when your players become good enough to graduate and play in the W League, do not let Sarah Walsh talk them up, because without fail they will not play well again that whole season. So
I'm on the Kyra Cooney cross at the moment. She's my...
No, she's good. Leave her alone. Anne Odong, let's talk to you. You've been involved in the women's game as a sport for so long because you've been a passionate football fan your whole life. Tell us a little bit about how your website has developed over the years and how much of an impact the W League's had and how much you think that's filtering down to grassroots level.
I think the story of our website in particular, but I think the story of women's football has grown along with the story of social media. When I first started in 2008, there was very little social media. I didn't even know what Facebook was. It was just this thing that was bandied around, and Twitter was also in its infancy, and all the others like Instagram and YouTube were all sort of starting out. And I don't think it's a coincidence that women's football around that time was also, in terms of the media coverage, in its infancy. And Sarah would know it was fighting for space. It was a space where they believed that there was limited columns and inches to be able to be filled, and women's sport wasn't one of those that was filled in there, and football was also not one of those sports that filled those pages. So when the internet grew up and you had social media, there was the ability for people to drive the agenda and start the conversation about what they wanted to talk about. And other people then decided to go out and find that information that they wanted. Having that space there meant that if you were interested in women's football, you could go out and search the information that you actually wanted rather than having the agenda driven by mainstream media. And I think that's been vital and crucial to the interest and the growth in the game. And it's not just here in Australia. We've seen that all around the world, and we're one of many networks of specialised sports websites, and it's really helped drive that growth and that interest. And I think at grassroots level, we know that a lot of the people who come to our site or come to our social media properties are playing sports at the grassroots.
And is that somewhere where you can deliver content for them as well? Because some of the stories behind some of your players, or I hate the word journeys, but it's sort of quite relevant to this, the journey they've taken to get from, where they started to where they are now. A lot of that is quite engaging from a grassroots perspective. Isn't that some way where you can connect with the clubs?
Absolutely, and I think it's also, a lot of the speakers have said today, is that the content or how women consume particular types of media is quite different to how men consume it. So when you are pitching to engage women, speak to them. Ask them what kind of things do they want to see, what kind of stories do they want told. And that's what we do quite often. We speak to the people who engage with our content and say, what do you want to know more about? And you'll be really surprised at what kind of answers they come back with. And then you are then giving that content back to them. They're engaging with it, and they're also one of the great things I love seeing is they're sharing that content. They're sharing videos of the Matildas at the Tournament of Nations, and they're talking about it on the various medias as well. And so making sure that the content is specific to what people want will keep them coming back to you, keep them being engaged with you. And I think that's one of the key concepts, is talk to your fan base, talk to your the women in your club, and ask them, what do they actually want to see?
Tara, I know you can talk to that subject quite closely, so I'm going to actually just lob the ball over your way and let you run away with this. But perhaps just to start, can you clarify when we say grassroots, exactly what that means to you?
Yeah, so for those of you in the room, and most of you would be familiar, but for those of you not, in Victoria we have community clubs and we have NPL clubs. NPL for men's and women's is limited in the number of age groups you have, which of course means that your club is only ever going to get to a certain size because you hold trials, and your 13s, 15s, 18s, and now 19s in the case of women, you're only going to have one team a year. So NPL is a bridge between complete amateur and professional, or semi-professional in the case of the W League, but working towards professional. So grassroots, when I think about that word, means community clubs who can get as big as they possibly can. And when we had the first planning meeting for this entire forum, one of the objectives that we, the FFV staff, came up with to try and go for is that every club that didn't have a women's team would at least think about or try to start a Mini Roos kickoff program and try to have a women's presence in their club for the first time. Every club that already had women's teams would try to grow them. And every club that has the geographical advantage of being in an outer suburban space, whether it's Mount Martha, Craigieburn City, West Side Strikers, anything on the peninsula really, that as they grow from a club of 80 to 180 in the space of 2 years, or from 200 to 800 in the space of 3 years, that they are putting the building blocks in place as a club to make sure that they are not a male-dominated environment whose objective is to rise up the football pyramid, but their objective is, in fact, to provide football to as many people as possible. And if we're going to get to 50-50 by 2023, increasing female participation and building female-friendly environments within our community or grassroots clubs is actually a huge priority, because right now, if we've had a lot of talk about role models today, but a role model club right now is probably one that's sitting at the top of the NPL, may never have had a women's presence in a actually playing football sense ever over the course of its history. And so what do we as the Federation want our fastest growing clubs to actually aspire to when they embrace for the number of people that are going to be walking through their doors? And something we'll get to over the next half an hour, how are they going to get those people walking through their doors, and what do they see at the club when they arrive, or when a parent makes a decision based on a Google search for the first time when they're looking for a club for their daughter to play for? So that's the opening salvo. Yeah, I mean, Anne touched on the growth of social media and how it has assisted the growth of women's football. And one thing that we actually spoke about prior to coming on stage here is self-publication and the ability to determine what you share to a mass audience now is so much more important given the fractured media landscape. Everyone on their own phone is making their own decision about what the media is. And I just want to know, sort of, what for you was the tipping point where you realised that all of a sudden you had that level of authority and control over a message about women's football that maybe hadn't existed previously, where getting into, say, The Age or the Herald Sun or onto a 3AW or a Triple M would have been seen as the be-all and end-all for women's football, but now all of a sudden it's Facebook reach, it's the number of retweets, it's the interaction on an Instagram post that has actually kind of wrestled back a bit of the control for everyone in this room, because everyone can publish their own content, to actually, you know, be an authoritative voice or a voice of influence within women's football.
It's cute that you think I've got authority, but we'll go with that. In terms of, for us, it was actually the 2010 Asian Cup, and Sarah, you were there playing, so you were in that environment, but I was at home watching. And when we speak about social media helping with the growth of women's football, I would like to stress it's hand in hand with traditional media. It's hand in hand with television. The two work together. It's a symbiotic relationship. So I never think that social media is everything. It's just part of a symbiotic relationship. And one of the key things is always you can't be what you can't see. And that's always been something that's really struck with me strongly throughout the years. But the 2010 Asian Cup was an opportunity on social media. It was also on TV on ABC. And for the first time, I saw a lot of conversation around the game, the Matildas, the tactics. And there was a lot of conversation about who these players were and people wanting to know more about them. Once we knew that there was something there, it was going about building a team and, again, building the content that people wanted to know. At that time, it was the really basic content of who is Sarah Walsh? What position does she play? How can I go see her play again? And so for us at that time, it was about disseminating the information. And I think that's where, bringing it back to Grassroots, that's where you have the power to be able to let people know that you are a club, you exist, and here is the information about how you can get involved. How many clubs here, raising your hand, have a website or a social media presence currently?
It's a lot of hands. I mean, I and my media team at the FFV, we have a platform that allows us to monitor the read and open rates and the click rates on mass communications that we send out. And I know it's the off-season for winter clubs, but consistently us promoting this forum to our clubs, which is a mailing list of about 1,300 emails to reach 330 clubs, has been going at about 30%. Now, in season, it tends to go at about 60%, which means a third of the clubs are hitting delete without even opening the email before even reading what's inside. And it does mean that a lot of responsibility has to fall onto social media to try and create, in this case, a bit of a fear of missing out because of the opportunity of what this forum represented. And we actually, as a media team, crunched the numbers. 91% of Victorian clubs at least have a website. How recently it's been updated, we didn't measure. Facebook, also about 90%. Instagram, which all contemporary data says is a female-dominated platform with an extraordinary gender skew above 60% female to male usage, only 44% of Victorian clubs have an Instagram account. So one of the things we wanted to come here and talk about is if you're a parent and you have no affinity or association with football and you couldn't even pick a player who's playing tonight, wouldn't know their name, you'd know who Tim Cahill is, but you wouldn't know, which A-League team he plays for, mainly because you've only seen him in commercials. And your kids come home from school and say, I want to play soccer. Where are you going to go to find them a club? Well, you're going to go to Google. So if your presence digitally, when a person puts in the suburb they live in and soccer club, you need to be there and have a digital presence to be able to capture that interest, because the parents ultimately, if they click onto a website and they see that the Q Soccer Club hasn't updated its website and the office bearers for 2014 have just been appointed, then they're not going to choose that club, or they're going to wait for referral or word of mouth from a different club. Now, anyone with a smartphone or a social media account in this room is going to think that I'm not saying anything profound, but we've done the work, and this would be a profound step because we currently have 70% of our clubs not even reading the email about this forum being on. And we have numerous websites, social media accounts that have sat untouched or unloved. The committee members that started them moved on. So a club's digital presence, I mean, it's not profound marketing as such, but it is so important to Grassroots to be there to capture the interest when it comes along. Because tonight, girls are going to be watching this match on SBS. They're going to be listening to Sarah, and they're going to be listening to the broadcast. They're going to be watching Sam Kerr, and they're going to say, Mum, Dad, how do I do that? How do I play soccer? And tonight could actually be one of the most important nights for our 2018 Regos next year, as far as people actually jumping onto Google and looking for a club. And
further to that, can I just tell you that there is a trickle-down effect from social media. I'm not on Twitter or on Instagram, but I use it for research, for commentary. I'm what Sarah calls a Twitter stalker. So, if I'm calling a victory game, I Google Tats Dowie, Instagram or Twitter or whatever to see what she's been up to, because Wikipedia is not going to tell me that. And it's much more interesting. Or Laura Allaway or Steph Catley or whatever. And you see that. What I also see is when they're tagged in the shout-outs from, say, Calder United. Great to see our captain out there from, 2014. Geelong Galaxy, if Laura Sporanovic is playing. And that way I know that they're an ex-player of your club, which then has that trickle-down effect where the kids watching and go, oh, wow, she started at my club and I can, one day be there. So there's just little bits, and your club will get a shout-out in the broadcast and everybody's happy.
And I'll add to that in terms of the different properties that you have, the website, the social media, how much female imagery is on there. Because if those parents, those mums and dads are Googling tonight and all they see is male imagery, the message comes back pretty clearly to them. Maybe the female teams in this club are not the priority. So even small things like that, having female players, little girls,
the language
is very important. Having all of that around your different properties brings a message that is inclusive and is welcoming.
One thing I wanted to bring up here, and Sarah and Anne, you can both speak to this because you were far better players than I was before I also tore my ACL.
No, wrong person.
But when you went to your local club as players, or you went to a visiting club, did you ever see a poster or photos on the wall of a Matildas player?
No, actually, the first thing I did, we developed a women's football development guide. I'd actually like to see hands up if you've heard about it, had one, downloaded it. Okay.
It's heartening to know that Ray Dower and Moya Dodd have downloaded it.
That's one of the first things we put in. So we talk about the language at your club. We talk about the public face of your club. So what does it look like? Do they turn up? What are they greeted by? The sight of boys and men, and then you're playing in boys only competitions with boys, and we put specifically there the imagery. So for us, especially here in Victoria, 2 professional clubs to be able to aspire to. So there should be a picture of Natasha Dowie up in the change rooms where you can, or whether it be a Steph Catley. We're spoilt for choice down here. So that's just a small thing, but we've talked about it over and over again. It's the look and feel of your club.
It is, and again, it's not something profound, but imagine going to any away club that you visited, or even your own, and walking into some of the rooms. I mean, I went to well over 150 games from State 4 all the way up to the NPL over winter, and I don't recall going into too many clubs. The majority were NPL, to be fair, but community clubs as well, and seeing imagery of either that club or of a professional team or a national team which had female imagery on the walls to say, we're part of the women's football movement. We're paying attention to what happened in Penrith and what happened in Newcastle and what happened at the Tournament of Nations, and we're paying attention to the groundswell of momentum behind this team, which is getting mathematically closer to being number 1 on the FIFA rankings and a genuine contender for the next 2 World Cups. And when you come to this club, when 8-year-old, 11-year-old, 14-year-old, or a group of friends decide to go to their local club, they walk through the door and they see the same thing. They see Sam Kerr on the wall because players at this club come here because they want to play like Sam Kerr, or they want to be Sam Kerr. They dream of being like her one day. And if you don't see that at the club, and maybe you see, behaviours, attitudes, an environment that does not reflect that, the chances of retaining, even if you are able to get a player's initial interest for that one season, the churn rate in Victoria is still pretty extraordinary. Like, we have huge mini-roos uptake, but also huge churn, especially in teenage females once they reach, for sort of the bottleneck of 14 to 16, of players who are leaving the game. So retention is just as important, that even if you are able to get over that initial hump of attracting players to your club, that you're doing the things to retain them. Now, it's easier said than done, and I'm sure all of you are thinking of an away venue you went to this last winter where you can't imagine it being done. And I guess I'm fortunate because I know at a club where it's maybe a group of angry old men who just want to sit around and have a drink and abuse the referee, that I'm there to commentate an NPL game, and that's what comes with the territory. But, again, I'm not making a decision for my kids. You as a club have to make a decision for the prospective kids that are going to be coming there, growing your numbers, improving the gender balance, the administration of your club, and also your prospects when you go to council with your hand out. I mean, so many Victorian councils have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 soccer clubs all competing with each other for that slice of the pie, that when they look at your club and they see a gender balance, they see a committee with equal representation, they see a club that's doing the right things, they say, well, when they put their hand out for funding and say we need change rooms, we need lights, we need a synthetic, we're seeing that they're doing the right things and putting the right building blocks in place, that if we as a council invest in this club, we will get a return on that investment.
Before we open this to the floor, because I'm sure that it will be quite valuable to our audience here to be able to connect with you directly to find out what they can be doing, what's the single most important marketing initiative in your eyes for a grassroots club?
Yeah, I think it's, I'll quote the Male Champions of Change. So Emma and myself are working closely. David Gallup is part of that, the sporting program for that. They talk about auditing the public face of your organisation. So I think if you just go onto that website, it basically, point for point, what you could actually be doing. And in an organisation, that means how you advertise for roles. What language do you use? Who's on the interview panel? And I think when you take that to a grassroots club, when the young girl and her parents turn up, who might be new to the sport, what's the first thing that they see? Who are they greeted by? Are the women only working in the canteens? Are there no female coaches? Are there no female referees? Because if they turn up to a club, and you might very well be trying to do the right thing, are they in subservient roles? Are they seen in decision-making positions? And I think we underestimate that because it's unconscious, and if young girls and parents don't see it, it's quite telling. So I think just to think about what your club looks like.
I would speak to marketing to adult women. And the reason I say this is because, as you all know, a lot of the times women are the decision makers, key decision makers in lots of areas. And so marketing to them and saying that this is something that you're going to enjoy, this is something that's going to be family friendly, that will keep them involved in the game. And if they're, even the ages of, say, 25 to 35, if they're really invested in the game, if they're really invested in football, they're going to want to continue that association well into the future and when they are raising their kids as well. So making sure that the whole environment for those young women, that 20 to 35 age group, keeping them in the game is really important because that's really an investment in the next generation.
I mean, it is a combined approach across your digital platforms to have an up-to-date website, a Facebook account and an Instagram, and to understand the function of all three and the purpose they serve in you as a club going into the phones, into the space of your target demographic, whether it's teenage, playing age juniors, or whether it's adults for an open age team, that you're going into that space and selling your club and trying to attract new people to the club. And I mean, one of the most fascinating games I went to over winter was Heidelberg Stars against Broadmeadows Stars. State League 4 Women's, 11 a.m. kickoff on a Sunday morning. It was organised chaos in that I genuinely think that neither team had a single player who aspired to be anything other than playing with their friends, enjoying a Sunday morning. You had three coaches who were shouting their heads off, going crazy, literally trying to kick every ball with them because the players couldn't, but that was the best thing about it. You had people who are turning up committed 18 times a year to playing on a Sunday morning. They're not players of any great ability, but they are doing it for reasons that are beyond football, and it is that social inclusion, that feeling of kinship and camaraderie, that ability to be part of a community. And it was actually one of the more satisfying games I went to all year to know that this happens, not just because I'm here and not just because I'm watching, every week of the season for 18 weeks. And that actual division, State League Women's 4 North, had about 15 or 16 teams in it this year, which means that it wasn't just that one venue, it was 8 other venues that Sunday for 18 weeks a year where players of that standard were coming together to be a part of football because, rightly or wrongly or for whatever reason, football had drawn them in of the way they wanted to spend such a huge amount of their spare time.
Can I just add one final thing with Teo's point about the digital assets? Pick one or two that you're going to be able to provide consistent content for. I think one of the things that happens is people get very excited about all the different types of social media that's available. They start all different types of accounts and they don't keep them up to date. So just pick one or two that really speak to you and to your club. Find good people. I think one of the things you've got to understand is women's football fans, they're fanatics. Once you get them in, they will be there for life. So find them and use their talents that they've already got, and they will be the ones who will talk up your club, whether it's the Grassroots club or whether it's a W League club as well. So just be consistent, pick one or two and just do a really good job of it.
And just to piggyback off that point, delegation is so important. I think one of the great achievements of clubs that do social media well at grassroots level is that they've clearly identified Gen Ys or millennials within their club and empowered and trusted them to actually take over social media accounts and run them in a way that speaks to people their age. Like, I'm 31 and I have a guy in my media team, Sean Ellicott, who is 21, and I hear some of the music he plays and some of the things he finds funny and the stuff he tags me in on Facebook. But you know what? I let it all ride because he is from a different generation and I am learning about young people through the eyes of a 21-year-old kid. And as much as some of it might feel a little bit uncomfortable because it is giving up a little bit of control, I think there is an element within your club that if you trust someone enough to do it, they can actually do a fantastic job speaking to exactly the sort of people that you want to draw in, and that is playing age players.
You're going to have a room full of people with 14-year-olds running their websites. Watch out. Now, I have a question for you three. You will be sticking around to the end of proceedings today?
I've got a head, sorry.
But you'll be back tomorrow.
Back tomorrow.
And both of you?
Yeah.
Because I do apologise, I've just been informed we're running a little bit behind time, so we won't have time to do a Q&A with the floor, but they'll all be around at some stage, and if you have any questions, I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them.
Well, as part of the show bag Easter egg hunt tomorrow, there is actually a 2-page flyer, and I just want to give credit to one of our interns, Catherine Kvant, who did a lot of the research on contemporary marketing and social media usage to put this together. So I would encourage every club to take the 2-page flyer and to discuss it with your club's committee, who are the right people within this club to actually action some of the things that these various organisations are recommending in order to communicate on social media.
Excellent. Then you can get in touch with these three and they'll direct you to the closest teenager, correct? Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that. Would you please thank Teo Pellizzeri, Anne Odong and Sarah Walsh.